Hello, it's Clozapine Fit and Lean here again. So today I want to go into the topic of obesity. Okay, so obesity is actually what we call a systemic full body disease. It's not just simply a disease, okay, where someone just looks a bit different to you because they're chubby and you're not, okay? So, I want to go into really what true obesity actually means. I don't mean just being, 10 or so pounds, a bit, more than what you want to be. I mean people that are, how can I say, very, very overweight. So maybe also I'll discuss including people who are extremely overweight. So these, people that get to these miserable situations where they're like 200 pounds or more overweight. These, as people call them, Americans. Not meaning to slate off Americans. Right. So obesity, okay, is usually established during childhood. Okay, how we are raised, how we're spoken to, okay, how our parents give us food, what types of food we are given, has a dramatic influence as to what we establish as eating habits as adults and our relationship with food in general. Okay, what tends to mess people up with childhood obesity, I'll just like to say, is childhood obesity makes children very miserable. Okay, childhood obesity inflicts, the same quality of life on a child as actually an adult going through chemotherapy care for cancer. Okay, so they have a real bad time. So, as I say, what usually inflicts people, children with obesity, are essentially parents using food basically as a reward for, how can I say, tasks that they want to be completed, or as a reward for good behaviour. Okay, so for example, in my opinion, an irresponsible parent might take a child down, to say a McDonald's, okay, to have a hyper palatable junk food meal, or say a Happy Meal, if they say do well on a spelling test. Or if they're getting angry, they say, "Oh, calm down. Here's a few biscuits." Okay, what this establishes is an emotional connection with food. What happens here is the brain basically wires itself up and fires itself up to view basically these hyper palatable, junk food items with essentially comfort from your parents, okay, and also the intrinsic endorphin and dopamine and serotonin response that eating these foods in sort of large quantities kind of gives people. So, basically, what happens here is you start to get behavioural problems around your relationship with food, and it's insidious, okay, and children basically accumulate to a dangerous level of body fat, and that usually is what starts off with these chaotic or even disordered relationships with food, where people use food when they're adults, okay, as a coping mechanism to deal with life's harsh challenges, or because they're bored, or because they're lonely, or any other sort of emotions which they feel uncomfortable with. And it's much like a drug addiction. Okay, so we can see that if you take people, okay, who have had true obesity, I don't mean, as I say, a stone more over than what your ideal. I mean people who are like 50, 60, 80, 200 pounds overweight. Right, you take these people who have gotten that way because they've misused food items like this, or food, I don't think they're real food items, like McDonald's, KFCs, all this types. Right, you can actually see that they have, parts of their limbic system and frontal lobes are wired. These reward pathways, the how can I say, the limbic system, so limbic system are rewired in a similar way to as what a drug addict is. Okay, so these corporations, okay, these big giants, okay, that are big heavyweights in these games, like Nestle and Kraft and all these things, the fast food outlets know what they're doing. Okay, they actually purposefully design these products to be appealing and hyper palatable and rewarding and cheap, and consistent in how they are, from restaurant to restaurant and burger to burger, etc., etc., to get you hooked. They know what they're doing. And what happens here is, you have vulnerable people. They, end up, eating, a load of McDonald's when they're sad. It fires up all these, rewarding chemicals, and it wires up your brain fast. Now, what happens here, okay, is you abstain from these foods, or where you only eat them, sparingly, you lose all this weight with, a massive amount of effort with your diet and exercise and such. And people, okay, can who have been in these situations with their massive problem with their weight, can simply have literally one or two sort of binges with these foods. And because of something called delta phosphate, is all these pruned back neural pathways and nucleus accumbens and the mesolimbic system in general and the frontal lobes basically rewire and fire right back up. And they go on one of these binging sprees, and they can literally, these types of people can gain like a stone back in like a week. So this is a real big problem. And of course, if you're an adult and not a child, you have your own finances in abundance, okay, much compared to a child, you can go off whenever you like, okay, and what you can do is you can engage in these pathological behavior patterns and really, really harm yourself. So, people that misuse food items this way, diabetes, you can have a stroke, high blood pressure, kidney problems, heart problems, even eyesight problems, the compilation from, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, ischemic, results in general, so ischemic, how can I say, problems in general, so it's like stroke, heart attack mainly. Just because, it's not someone who starves themselves, as anorexia nervosa, as an eating disorder, is these, kind of binge eating patterns like this are still considered nowadays to be eating disorder behaviours. Okay, and it is it's a sole responsibility of these corporations because they get you hooked. They know what they are doing. So, also, is outside of the kind of neuropsychiatric and behavioural changes of an obese person, once you have obesity in this regard, is you establish those neural connections there with you for life, much the same as a recovering heroin addict is always in recovery, is when you become very obese, okay, is you have not just larger fat cells, you also have more fat cells. So the fat cells don't just go hypertrophy, they actually undergo hyplasia, and now you have more fat cells. So what happens here, say, if you establish obesity for, say, 6 months or more, is you have this hyplasia of fat cells. Because your fat cells are actually an endocrine tissue, they're an organ, okay, it secretes an endocrine hormone called leptin, where the medial hypothalamus in the CNS actually detects this level of leptin. And what happens now is your body now becomes what we call leptin resistant. So the medial hypothalamus is not, how can I say, picking up, it's not registering that energy regulatory hormone correctly. So now what happens, say, through, real hard effort, persistent, consistent hard effort, diet and exercise, someone goes from like 40-something% body fat down to, say, just 25% body fat. Well, now what happens is all of these, counter-regulatory mechanisms now kick in, basically to reduce non-exercise active thermogenesis, reduce, deionization of T4 into T3, so you only get reverse T3, which is metabolically inert, rather than T3, which is metabolically active. So it slows your metabolism down, makes you hyperphagic in your appetite, so now you rebound your weight back, plus about 20% extra in some circumstances. So it's all regulated not just by wiring and firing these pathological hijacking of the mesolimbic reward pathways. You now also have a biological problem where now your hormones, your leptin, ghrelin, neuropeptides like MPP, MPY36, MPY, interleukins like interleukin 6, I believe. These sort of neuropeptides and these hormones basically now go out of kilter. Okay, and essentially these very important sort of DNA hard-coded evolved survival how can I say mechanisms the body deploys to protect itself from famine are now working against you, not for you, and basically it traps you to obesity. And now what happens is it's extremely difficult to put your obesity into remission, because not only is it a neuropsychiatric and behavioural problem, is now you also have this this rubber band you're almost working towards, that basically the more you walk against this rubber band, the more and more difficult it is to progress forwards and forwards and forwards until it just slingshots you all the way back due to a bunch of endocrine problems, the hormonal problems, leptin, ghrelin, as I just said, aforementioned. So what do? You have to change your whole lifestyle, okay? You have to have maybe a eating counsellor, okay? And there's also a number of pharmacological options. So as I said, maybe, well, actually no, I didn't say. whatever. For example, I'm not recommending or prescribing, this is to do with your doctor, and I am not your doctor. There's things like these GLP drugs, so the incretin drugs, glucon-like peptide 1, GIP, so, gastrointestinal peptides, all these types of things, metformin, berberine even, as I said, works very effectively. And that's basically how you're supposed to tackle obesity, is through essentially behavioral modification, okay, accepting that you have basically some form of eating disorder in some cases, or behavioral problem because you've been hooked by these hyper palatable junk items, and also a multi-pronged approach. I said not just with that, but also with diet, exercise habits, lifestyle habits in general, getting used to eating less and sticking with it and getting used to it, and also furthermore, the multi-pronged faceted approach with using these GLP drugs, as well as the diet, lifestyle modifications, behavioural modifications, even maybe eating disorder, how can I say, therapies. So basically, long story short, obesity, okay, is not just simply someone looking a bit different because they've got more weight on them, okay, it's all to do with the CNS, so your behavior around food, so your relationship with food, all these regulatory and counter-regulatory hormones that basically go out of whack and kilter and balance, that bugger you up, so your body clings on to your weight rather than gets rid of your weight. And if you do get rid of your weight successfully, it just comes back if you don't deploy the correct pharmacological approaches, as I said, lifestyle, exercise approaches, eating habits and counselling. Okay, as I said, is even when you finally lose weight, if you've been one of these people, okay, that's been like massively overweight, is your brain, as I said, it registers like this certain level of dopamine. Now all of a sudden you've gone down to dopamine sort of like this. You have your less dopamine food items. You're having your chicken breast, your kale, broccoli, your basmati rice instead of having pizzas every night and chocolate bars. It's almost like you withdraw from drugs. Okay, so what you've got to do here is you've got to, as I say, work with the professionals. You need the GLP drugs prescribed long term. Okay, you need to have the behavioural techniques, your coping strategies if you are using food as a pathological outlet. And that's basically what true obesity is. As I said, it's not just someone who's come back from holiday and gained 5 pounds. True obesity is when you are like stuck in a rut where you are massively overweight and you just keep weight cycling because of your behaviour around food, etc., etc. And I don't mean to consistently just go over and over and over again, but that's basically what you have to deal with, is these corporations know what they're doing, they're very good at knowing what they're doing, and they got you hooked. Okay, Close Opinion, Fist and Lean signing out.